The artist I'm talking about today is Hank Willis Thomas. Hank Willis Thomas was born in 1976 in Plainfield, New Jersey. He lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. He is a conceptual artist working primarily with themes related to perspective, identity, commodity, media, and pop culture. The series of paintings beside him was inspired by a 1986 photograph by Ernest Withers of marchers during the Memphis Sanitation Workers March. Martin Luther King was assassinated while there in support of the march. The men carried signs which read, "I am a man." Inspired by the works of Carrie Mae Weems, Lorna Simpson, and his mother, photographer Deborah Willis, he employed language and familiar imagery to address issues that are often overlooked in our pop culture obsessed consumerist culture. Appropriated print advertisement from 1968, a landmark year in the civil rights movement, are stripped from their context to open up questions of cultural stereotypes and the way the media perpetuates them. While in the series Branded, he inverts the works, adding contemporary ad copy to provocative images. In recent years, I have approached my art practices assuming the role of a visual cultural archaeologist, Thomas has said. I am interested in the ways that popular imagery informs how people perceive themselves and others around the world. Here you see endless columns by Frank Williams, not Frank, Hank, sorry, Hank Willis Thomas. He was inspired by Constantine Sparancusi's endless columns, which celebrates the survival of Romania, the artist's homeland, after World War One. Thomas sometimes uses photographs of American athletes who speak out. He expresses admiration for Colin Kaepernick. He's a quarterback who refused to stand for the national anthem and is now out of work. Um, he states that they're not supposed to be political, that they're supposed to just do their job and or they don't get paid for speaking. He states if Ali and Jim Brown and Paul Robeson hadn't spoken, what would the world look like? He goes on to say that sports can be seen as a proxy for war, and it's not a coincidence that the World Cup came around at the same time as colonialism. A lot of football clubs in England were a part of the Industrial Revolution because workers needed some kind of leisure time. Uh, Hank Willis Thomas idea that he had in a low-key, thoughtful way says that art gives clues about our values in society. Art is timeless. Your art will outlive you. He added, I believe that art is political. I certainly believe all sports are political, not only because of the amount of money spent, you have to pay attention to it. In this image, you will see the historical and imaginative gap between two fields familiar to black Americans. You have the cotton field and the football field. In this image, you have two black male bodies, their faces obscured by the straw hat and the football helmet. They are facing each other in similar poses. We have what we assume is a slave crouching to pick cotton and a football player crouching as he awaits for the football. Um, they are mirror images of each other. You have a jet black background and a suspended in an environment. The photo traces the lineage of black bodies as commodified tools as profit and maps the genealogy of black ownership. In an interview with Thomas, he makes clear that the Cotton Bowl was intended to represent the 20th century sharecropping instead of slavery. Um, it was to bring forth the exploitation and spectacle. He is insistent on distinguishing between sharecropping and slavery, points to his belief on the continuing seepage of the historical past. Black exploitation did not end with slavery, but continued with sharecropping, lynching, and redlining, and continues with the NFL, NBA, and police brutality. Thomas wants the viewers to imagine these legacies not as close historical episodes, but instead as experiences on a continuum, shifting with time and always under constant bodily negotiation. Here, he wanted to explore the word branding as it relates in advertising, and he focuses on Nike and its logo because Nike is often using black men to promote their products, such as Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. He states, in what other contexts historically would branding exist? So, thinking about how slaves were branded as a sign of ownership, and how today so many of us live in a state of branded consciousness, he just wanted to bring focus on history to the present, how branding is still alive even though we're not technically forcing it upon somebody's body. This is another image of Nike being branded on somebody's chest. These images were made to make people uncomfortable, just to bring awareness that people are still being exploited, and he wanted to make it a forefront and put it out there on display. Along with the cotton bowl and the two branding photos that I showed you, we have strange fruit and one. And this all went in with the same series. Within this one, Thomas is stating that the history of lynching is still relatively recent, but is often shoved under the rug. He said he tied the theme to sports with images of basketball and replacing the hoop with a noose because someone playing in the NBA now could be a descendant of someone who was lynched. Thomas trained as a photographer and took on sculptures and installations. He appreciates the facility Muybridge's technique passed on to us all, allowing us to reduce movements into sets of frames. He states, in some of my more recent sculptures, I have started taking images from photographs and freezing them and turning them into sculptures. That's definitely a nod to Muybridge. I'm thinking about framing a moment and what that means, but also giving it a different perspective. When a photograph becomes a sculpture, all of a sudden you get to walk around it and interpret it in new ways. Here are some more snapshot sculptures that Thomas's have produced. I really enjoy the painting, the colors that he puts on here. Each one is beautifully painted. This is the last image I wanted to share with you guys. I really enjoyed the way he sculpted this, and again, the color. I like the just a little snapshot that he was able to get, and the name of it is Hand of God. I just enjoyed it. I feel like he fits in on our readings for this week for the masculinity part and the identity part, where sports play a role in coming up with an identity for oneself. And having a discussion with my husband, he was like, I don't feel like sports is masculinity, more sports is pride. And I was like, masculinity and pride are pretty much the same thing. So you guys can tell me differently when I come back to class. But I enjoyed his art. It was fun to research, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Dr. Balducci, for letting me record my presentation, and I'm sorry that I missed class.